Camp Lordsburg, New Mexico, October 15th, 1945, 4:47 in the afternoon. The sun hangs low over the desert, painting the sand in shades of copper and gold. 300 Japanese women stand in the yard, their cotton dresses stirring in the hot wind. They watch in silence as an arm rises high into the air. In that hand, a bamboo stick, the symbol of discipline in the Imperial Japanese Army, the symbol of obedience, the symbol of everything they've been taught since childhood about honor and shame. Lieutenant Ishikawa Takeshi holds that stick above his head. His face is red with rage, his knuckles white around the bamboo. Below him, trembling, a 19-year-old girl named Sakura, her crime singing an American song. The stick begins its descent. But before it can fall, before it can strike flesh, a large American hand shoots out and catches it mid-swing. The grip is iron, the message clear. Sergeant Daniel Miller stands between the Japanese officer and his target, 6'2", broad shoulders, gray eyes that have seen too much death. His voice is quiet but carries the weight of absolute authority. You don't touch her. Not here. Not ever. 300 women hold their breath. They have just witnessed something impossible. The enemy protecting them from their own people. The world they understood has turned upside down in a single moment. This is their story. They were taught that being captured was worse than death, that the enemy would show no mercy, that surrender meant dishonor so complete it could never be washed away. But in the scorching desert of New Mexico, 300 Japanese women were about to learn the most shocking truth of World War II. Sometimes your enemy treats you better than your own people, and that revelation shatters everything you thought you knew about honor, loyalty, and what it truly means to be human. If you want to hear the hidden stories from World War II, stories that challenge everything history books taught you, hit that subscribe button right now. These moments of humanity in the midst of war deserve to be remembered. They deserve to be told. To understand how we got to that impossible moment when an American soldier protected Japanese women from their own officers, we need to go back 2 months. To the day these women became prisoners of war. August 17, 1945. A transport ship crossing the Pacific Ocean from Manila to San Francisco. The hold is dark and suffocating. 300 women packed into a space meant for cargo, not human beings. The smell of salt water mixes with sweat and fear. They've been at sea for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of uncertainty. 3 weeks of terror about what waits for them on the other side. 2 days ago, they heard it on the ship's radio. Emperor Hirohito's voice, thin and crackling through static, speaking words that changed everything. Japan has surrendered. The war is over. But for these women, the nightmare is just beginning. In the darkest corner of the hold sits Emiko Tanaka, 24 years old, a translator who worked for the Imperial Japanese Navy in Manila. She clutches a small leather-bound notebook against her chest like it might protect her from what's coming. Emiko is different from most Japanese women of her time. Her father, Professor Tanaka Hiroshi, taught English literature at Waseda University in Tokyo. He believed daughters needed education just as much as sons. He gave her books when other girls got dolls. He taught her to question when other girls learned only to obey. Now that education feels like a curse. Emiko understands enough English to hear what the American sailors say as they walk past the hold. And what she hears doesn't match what she's been told her entire life. For years, propaganda told them American soldiers were demons, brutal, without mercy, that they would torture captured women, humiliate them, treat them worse than animals. But on this ship, Emiko hears the American sailors saying things like, make sure they have enough water, and the pregnant one needs to see the medic, and don't let them sit in the sun too long. It doesn't make sense. Maybe they're pretending, Emiko thinks. Maybe once we reach land, the real faces will show. Next to her sits Haruko Sato, 22 years old, a clerk from Tokyo. Quiet, anxious, but with eyes that notice everything others miss. Her family was poor. She worked to support her widowed mother. Now she whispers to Emiko in the darkness. What do you think they'll do to us when we get there? Emiko doesn't answer. She doesn't have an answer. Across from them, Sakura Yamamoto tries to maintain hope despite everything. 19 years old, a nurse, orphaned young when her father died. Her mother worked as a seamstress in Osaka, fingers bleeding from endless hours with needle and thread to keep food on the table. Sakura learned early that life is hard, but you keep smiling anyway. The war is over, Sakura says with forced brightness. Maybe they'll send us home soon. Ayame Kobayashi, the oldest among them, at 28 shakes her head. A senior nurse, a widow since 1942 when her husband fell at Guadalcanal. No children. She treats the younger nurses like daughters now. Her voice carries the weight of someone who has seen too much. Don't hope too soon. We are prisoners of war. That is a shame we will carry for the rest of our lives. That night, as the ship rocks through dark waters, whispered conversations fill the hold. An older woman's voice cuts through the darkness. We should kill ourselves. It's the only way to preserve honor. Ayame responds coldly. If you want to die, sister, die alone. I choose to live, even as a prisoner. Another voice trembling. But our families will be ashamed. Being captured alive is the greatest disgrace. Then Emiko speaks, her voice quiet but clear. The emperor told us to surrender. We obeyed him. That is not disgrace. That is obedience. The words settle over them like a blanket. Because Emiko is right. They didn't surrender out of cowardice. They surrendered because their emperor commanded it. The divine voice they were taught never to question had spoken. They obeyed. But does that make the shame any less? No one knows the answer. These women had been taught that death was better than dishonor. But they were about to discover that their real test wasn't surviving the enemy. It was surviving their own people's judgment. And the first test would come sooner than they expected. August 24th, 1945. Camp Lordsburg, New Mexico. 3 in the afternoon. The trucks grind to a halt. Doors swing open. Desert heat hits them like a physical blow, 103 degrees Fahrenheit. Air so dry it steals moisture from their lungs with each breath. The smell strikes them first. Hot metal from the truck beds. Dust and sage. No humidity. No salt air. Nothing like the tropical islands they've known. Nothing familiar. Then the sounds. Wind hissing through barbed wire. American boots crunching on gravel, steady and unhurried. Silence so vast after weeks of ocean waves and ship engines that it feels unnatural. In the distance, a male, goats or sheep from a nearby ranch. Emiko steps down from the truck. Her legs shake. 3 weeks at sea have stolen her land balance. The ground feels hard and foreign under her feet. She looks around. Barbed wire fences stretch 10 feet high. Guard towers at each corner. American soldiers with rifles silhouetted against the burning sky. Long wooden barracks painted white arranged in perfect rows. Mountains in the distance, jagged brown teeth against the endless blue. Haruko whispers beside her. It looks like hell. Nothing can live here. But then a building door opens. A woman steps out into the sunlight. Nurse Sarah Henderson, 35 years old, red hair the color of autumn leaves. So pale it's almost translucent, dusted with freckles. Green eyes, a color the Japanese women have never seen in human faces before. 5'8", strong but gentle in her movements. White medical uniform, crisp and clean. Sarah smiles. It's a real smile. Warm. Genuine. Emiko freezes. The enemy shouldn't smile at prisoners. Sarah speaks, her voice carrying warmth that seems impossible. Welcome, you're safe now. Let's get you checked and cleaned up. A young Japanese-American man stands beside her, David Nakamura, 28 years old, the translator. He repeats her words in Japanese, that simple phrase. You're safe now. Those 3 words make many of the women cry because they cannot remember the last time anyone told them they were safe. They cannot remember the last time safety felt like a possibility. But then Emiko turns her head, looks across the compound toward another building. Her heart stops. 6 men in Japanese officer uniforms stand before a separate barracks. They are prisoners too, but they stand straight backs, rigid, maintaining every aspect of military bearing, even in captivity. And the man in the center, Lieutenant Ishikawa Takeshi, 42 years old, the most rigid officer from the Manila Command. Sharp, angular face, black mustache, eyes like ice. Famous for discipline, so harsh men flinched when he approached. Emiko remembers clearly. Once she mistranslated a single word during a briefing. Ishikawa grabbed her arm so hard it bruised purple, and black got in her face and growled, "If you make another mistake, I will strike you." Now he's here, a prisoner like her, but his eyes still carry that power, that authority, that unspoken message, "You will obey me still." I am watching. Haruko grabs Emiko's hand, trembling. He's here. That means we're still not free. Even here, we still have to obey. Emiko swallows hard, her throat dry from more than just desert air. Even in America, even as prisoners, the invisible chains remain. They thought crossing the ocean would free them from the war. But the real prison wasn't the barbed wire around the camp. It was the invisible cage of fear, shame, and obedience that their own commanders would use to control them. And breaking free from that cage would require more courage than surviving any battle. The women are led into a cool building. Ceiling fans turn slowly overhead. The smell of antiseptic, clean and medicinal, nothing like the blood and rot of field hospitals they've known. Nurse Sarah directs them to line up. One by one, they will be examined, given clean clothes assigned to barracks. When Emiko's turn comes, she enters a small room. Sarah waits there with a clipboard and kind eyes. Through David, Sarah explains what will happen. I'm going to check your health. Just basic things: temperature, weight, any injuries. Is that okay? Is that okay? Those three words again. Emiko has never been asked if something is okay. In the Imperial Japanese military system, you obey. You don't get asked. Orders are given. Compliance is expected. No one seeks permission to touch you, examine you, command you. Emiko nods, uncertain what else to do. Sarah's examination is gentle. She checks Emiko's pulse with soft fingers, looks in her eyes with a small light, asks through David if anything hurts. When she notices old bruises on Emiko's upper arm, finger-shaped marks, from when Ishikawa grabbed her 3 weeks ago, Sarah's smile fades. Who did this to you? Did someone hurt you? Emiko shakes her head quickly. Cannot speak. How can she explain? In her world, that was just discipline. That was normal. That was what happened when you failed. Sarah doesn't push. But her eyes hold something Emiko has never seen from authority before. Concern, compassion, perhaps even pain that someone hurt this young woman. Why would the enemy care if someone hurt me? Sarah writes something on her chart, then hands Emiko a cloth bag. Inside, new clothes, a light blue cotton dress, fresh undergarments, a towel, real soap, not the ash mixed stuff they've been using, a comb, canvas shoes. These are for you. Go shower, then change. Take your time. Take your time. Another phrase Emiko has never heard. She's only been told, hurry up, don't waste time, move faster, be more efficient. The shower room is communal but private. 10 shower heads. When Emiko turns the handle, warm water flows. Not cold, not scalding, just right. Perfect temperature. She stands under the spray. Water runs through her hair, washing away 3 weeks of salt and grime. The soap smells like lavender. Creates soft lather in her hands. Feels like luxury she doesn't deserve. Emiko cries. Not from pain, not from fear, but from complete confusion. Why would the enemy give her real soap? Why would they ask, may I, before touching her? Why would they tell her to take her time? This has to be a trap. They want us to lower our guard, then they'll attack. But a small voice in the back of her mind whispers another possibility. What if they're actually kind and want it impossible? American soldiers are demons. The propaganda said so. The officers said so. It cannot be wrong. But then why does a demon give you lavender soap while Emiko struggled to understand American kindness across the camp. An American soldier was wrestling with demons of his own. Sergeant Daniel Miller, 32 years old, 6'2", broad-shouldered, brown hair going gray at the temples too early, gray eyes that have seen things no man should see, hands calloused from ranch work back in Montana, a small scar on his forehead from Okinawa shrapnel. Born 1913 in Montana, family raised cattle, the kind of hard, honest work that builds character and strong backs. Enlisted in 1941 after Pearl Harbor. Fought at Guadalcanal, Saipan, Okinawa. Each battle carving away pieces of the boy he used to be, replacing them with something harder. 4 months ago in April 1945, his best friend died on Okinawa. Tommy Rodriguez, a kid from Texas with a smile that could light up the darkest foxhole. Japanese artillery shell. Miller held Tommy while he died, felt his friend's blood soaking into the volcanic sand, made a promise through tears that he would make them pay. Now Miller is assigned to manage the mess hall, feeding prisoners, Japanese prisoners, and he doesn't know how to reconcile that with the promise he made to a dying friend. Captain John Richards calls Miller into his office. Richards is 45, served in World War I, believes in the Geneva Convention, like some men believe in the Bible. Stern but fair. Richards looks Miller in the eye. Sergeant, I know what you went through in the Pacific. I know you lost Tommy at Okinawa. I know how hard that war was. Miller's jaw tightens. Yes, sir. But the war is over now, Richards continues. These women aren't soldiers. They're civilians who got caught up in something bigger than them. I need you to treat them according to the Geneva Convention. Understood? Miller nods stiffly. Yes, sir. Richards leans forward. I'm not asking you to forget Tommy, but I'm asking you to remember that Tommy fought to defend American values. And one of those values is this. We treat prisoners better than the enemy treated ours. That's what makes us different. That's what makes us better. The words sink into Miller like stones into deep water. Tommy fought to defend American values. So if Miller treats prisoners with cruelty, isn't he betraying everything Tommy died for? Miller thought his war ended when Japan surrendered. But he was about to discover the hardest battle isn't against the enemy with guns. It's against the enemy within yourself. The battle against hatred, against revenge, against the easiest path. And 300 Japanese women would become his unexpected teachers. 6 o'clock in the evening, the mess hall. 300 women, now clean, wearing new cotton dresses, walk into the large dining room, and the smell hits them like a wave crashing on shore. Food, real food. The smell of it awakens cells they thought had died from starvation. On long tables, a feast they cannot believe is real. White rice, each grain separate and gleaming. No husks, no grass mixed in, not the dirt-flavored gruel they have eaten for months. Beef stew, rich brown color, large chunks of meat, the smell of onions and carrots and potatoes simmered until tender, gravy thick and glistening with fat. The kind of meal they haven't seen since before the war. Fresh vegetables. Green beans still crisp, bright green, carrots cut in rounds orange as sunset, mashed potatoes smooth and creamy with real butter melting golden on top, white bread, sliced thick, still warm from the oven, butter in small dishes beside it yellow and soft, fresh milk in glass pitchers, cold enough that condensation beads on the outside, white and pure, red apples, piled in wicker baskets, each one the size of a fist, shining, perfect, not bruised or mealy like the rotten scraps they've been getting. Chef Betty Morrison stands beside the serving line, 45 years old, a large American woman with gray streaked hair, white apron, kind face marked by years of smiling and crying in equal measure. She lost her son in 1944 at Normandy. She understands what war steals from families. Betty waves them forward with genuine warmth. Come on, girls, take as much as you want. You need to eat good after that long journey. David translates. But even without translation, the women understand the gesture. Eat. Eat as much as you need, but they hesitate. Haruko whispers to Emiko, is this a trap? Did they poison the food? Ayami, the senior nurse, shakes her head. If they wanted us dead, we'd be dead already. They don't need poison. Sakura, the youngest, too, hungry to wait any longer, takes an apple, bites into it. The sound of that first bite is like a gunshot in the quiet room. Crisp, the sweet juice floods her mouth. Natural sugar, cold, fresh. Sakura cries right there. It creates a chain reaction. One woman eats, then 2, then 10. Soon all 300 are sitting, eating in complete silence, except for the small sounds of survival. The sounds matter. Forks touching plates, that soft metallic clink, small chewing sounds as they try to control themselves, try not to eat too fast after months of near starvation. The sound of swallowing, quiet sighs of relief when food hits empty stomachs. Suppressed sobs, just small sniffles as emotions overwhelm them. Emiko picks up her first piece of beef. It's heavy, heavier than anything she's eaten in 8 months. Warm, the temperature just right. She puts it in her mouth. It's so tender it dissolves on her tongue. The taste, sweet from the natural sugars in the meat, rich from the fat, perfectly salted, flavored with herbs she can't identify but taste like comfort. Her eyes fill with tears, but she doesn't stop eating. Around her, 300 women share this moment, not just a meal, but the first time in months, maybe years, that someone has cared whether they were hungry. Heavy footsteps echo through the hall. The room freezes. 300 forks suspended in midair. Lieutenant Ishikawa enters with 5 other Japanese officers. They are prisoners too, but they still wear their officer uniforms threadbare and faded but maintained with military precision. They still walk with backs straight and heads high. Ishikawa scans the 300 faces. His voice cuts like a blade through winter air. Speaking in Japanese. You eat the enemy's food and forget your honor. No one dares look up. Look at yourselves. Eating American beef, smiling at American soldiers, accepting comfort from the people who killed millions of our countrymen. His voice rises, filling the hall. While your families starve to death in Tokyo, Osaka, Hiroshima, you sit here eating your fill. Do you feel no shame? Have you completely forgotten you are Japanese? Many women set down their forks. The food that tasted like salvation moments ago now feels like betrayal in their mouths. Ishikawa points at Sakura, the 19-year-old still holding her apple. Did you accept food from the enemy? Sakura trembles. Cannot speak. Answer me. She whispers so quietly it's almost inaudible. Yes, yes I did. Do you know what that means? You have traded the honor of your nation for the price of an apple. Then Miller steps in. He doesn't understand Japanese, but he reads body language fluently after years of war. The officer is threatening them. The girls are terrified. The atmosphere is dangerous. Miller's voice cuts across the room. Is there a problem here? Ishikawa turns switches to broken English. No problem. I speak to my people. They forget their duty. Miller walks closer, looks Ishikawa directly in the eye. 2 men, one a rigid Japanese officer who believes honor means dying rather than surrendering. One an American soldier who lost his best friend to Japanese artillery but believes in human decency above revenge. Well, you've spoken. Now let them eat in peace. 1 second of silence stretched tight as wire. Ishikawa nods coldly, turns to leave. But before he exits, he speaks in Japanese loud enough for everyone to hear. You will be reminded, every day, until you remember who you are. After the officers leave, 300 women sit motionless. Food still on their plates, but now it weighs heavy as stones. Betty sees the change, the light draining from their faces. She speaks to David. Tell them the food is here because they need it. Tell them accepting food when you're hungry isn't shameful. It's survival, David translates. Some women cry harder because they want to believe those words. But their entire lives they've been taught that living when you should have died equals disgrace. Emiko looks at her plate. 1 piece of beef remains now cold. She's still hungry. Her body screams for the nutrition. But she cannot make herself eat another bite. Because every bite now feels like treason. Every bite became an act of betrayal. Every moment of comfort became a sin. These women were caught between 2 impossible truths. Their bodies needed food to survive. But their culture said accepting enemy kindness was worse than death. This conflict would tear them apart unless they learned something that seemed impossible. That maybe everything they'd been taught about honor was wrong. The desert night fell cool and dark. 300 women lay in real beds for the first time in months. Mattresses, pillows, 2 blankets each. After sleeping on hard ground, on crowded ships, on anything they could find, the softness felt like a dream. But sleep would not come. Through the thin walls, they could hear the Japanese officers in the nearby building, arguing among themselves, discussing the disgrace of surrender, the weakness of accepting American charity. Ishikawa's voice rose above the others. Tomorrow we will make sure they understand. They may be prisoners, but they are still Japanese. They will maintain honor or they will be reminded of their duty. The threat hung in the desert air like smoke. Emiko lay staring at the ceiling, watching shadows from the guard tower lights move across the wooden beams. Her stomach was full for the first time in months. She was clean. They had let her shower with real soap and warm water. She was lying on a soft bed, and yet she had never felt more conflicted. Haruka whispered from the next bed, Are you awake? Yes. Do you think we're betraying our country by being here? Emiko didn't answer right away. How could she? Everything she believed was being challenged. The Americans were supposed to be monsters, but they had been kind. The commanders were supposed to protect them, but they made them feel ashamed for surviving. "I don't know," Emiko finally said. "I don't know anything anymore." Haruka was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that would change how Emiko saw everything. "The American nurse gave me medicine today for an infection I've had for weeks. No one in our unit had medicine to give me, but the enemy did. The enemy cared if I was in pain. Our own people didn't." The simple truth of that statement settled over them both like snow covering a battlefield. The enemy had medicine. The enemy had food. The enemy had asked if they were okay, and their own commanders offered only shame and threats. Outside, the desert wind whispered against the barracks. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled at the moon. The women lay awake, caught between two worlds. The one they had known, where obedience and honor were everything, and this new one where the enemy showed unexpected mercy. Neither world made sense anymore, but dawn would come, and with it, the slow, painful process of learning that everything they'd been taught might have been built on lies, that true honor might look nothing like what they'd been told, that surviving with dignity might take more courage than dying for a false cause. The real battle had just begun, not against the Americans, but against the invisible prison inside their own minds. The days began to follow a rhythm. Every morning at 6, a bell rang across the camp. 300 women woke, made their beds with military precision, corners folded at perfect 90-degree angles, not a wrinkle in sight. They lined up outside the barracks in straight rows. An American guard would do the morning count. But there was no shouting, no screaming, no striking anyone whose uniform showed a spot of dirt. Just a simple head count and a greeting that still felt strange to hear. "Good morning, ladies. Everyone looks healthy today. Let's get some breakfast." Emiko remembered mornings in Manila, officers yelling at 5 a.m., standing at attention for 30 minutes regardless of rain or burning sun, being screamed at if your collar wasn't perfectly straight, never receiving praise, only criticism, only corrections, only reminders that you were never good enough. Now American soldiers said good morning and everyone looks healthy. The contrast felt unreal, like living in two different universes separated by an ocean and a fundamental difference in how humans treated each other. Work assignments were distributed after breakfast. The camp needed help with various tasks, and the women would be paid for their labor. Paid. In camp currency that could be used at the canteen to buy small luxuries. Soap, combs, writing paper, even candy. The concept of being paid for work as a prisoner made no sense in their understanding of how the world worked. Emiko was assigned to the medical clinic because of her English skills. She would work alongside Nurse Sarah and Dr. Thompson translating when Japanese prisoners needed medical care. Pay 80 cents per day in camp currency. Haruka was assigned to the laundry and mending facility. She would learn to use electric washing machines, technology she'd never seen before. Pay 60 cents per day. Sakura would help in the kitchen, working with Betty, learning American recipes, understanding how food could be both nourishment and comfort. Pay 60 cents per day. Ayame would work as a nurse in the clinic, directly assisting Sarah, learning American medical techniques that prioritize patient dignity above military efficiency. Pay 80 cents per day. On Emiko's first full day in the clinic, a male Japanese prisoner was brought in with a severe leg injury. The bone had broken badly, protruding at an angle that made even hardened soldiers wince. Dr. Robert Thompson, 38 years old with graying temples and gentle hands, examined the wound carefully. Through Emiko, he explained every step to the terrified patient. "Tell him I need to set the bone. It will hurt, but I'll give him morphine for the pain first. Ask if he understands and agrees to the procedure." Emiko translated, but confusion flooded her mind. Ask if he agrees? In Japanese military hospitals, doctors gave orders. Patients endured. No one asked permission. Compliance was assumed. Your body belonged to the emperor, to the military, to anyone with higher rank. Never to yourself. The injured soldier looked equally shocked. He nodded quickly, expecting the pain to start immediately, but Thompson injected morphine. Then he waited. Actually waited 5 full minutes for the medication to take effect before touching the injury. Throughout the procedure, he narrated each action, explaining, warning before causing unavoidable pain, apologizing when the patient grimaced. When finished, Thompson said something that struck Emiko like lightning. Tell him he needs to rest for 2 weeks, no walking. We'll bring food to his bed 3 times a day. He did well today. Very brave to endure that. Very brave. Eminko had never heard a doctor praise a patient before. Patients were expected to endure without complaint. That was duty. That was obligation. Praise was for those who exceeded expectations, never for those who simply met them. Sarah noticed Emiko's expression. She explained gently while they cleaned instruments. In America, we believe every patient deserves respect. Enemy or not, he's a human being in pain. Our job is to heal, not to punish. We ask permission because his body belongs to him, not to us. And we praise courage because enduring pain takes strength, whether you're American or Japanese. Our job is to heal, not to punish. Those 8 words echoed in Emiko's mind for days. They represented a philosophy so foreign to everything she'd known. Medicine as healing rather than just keeping soldiers functional for battle. Patients as human beings with agency rather than military assets. Pain as something to minimize rather than something to endure stoically to prove your worth. She was learning a new language. Not just English words, but the language of dignity. The language where may I came before touching someone. Where thank you was said to subordinates. Where I'm sorry wasn't weakness, but acknowledgement of shared humanity. Where your body belonged to you, not to those who commanded you. And this new language was changing her faster than she realized. Changing how she saw herself, how she saw others, how she understood what it meant to be human. September arrived with slightly cooler nights. With it came letters from home delivered through the Red Cross. The envelopes were thin, many sections blacked out by censors, but what remained told stories more devastating than any battle report. Haruko received a letter from her mother. She sat on her bed in the barracks, hands trembling as she unfolded the thin paper. Other women gathered around waiting for news from the homeland they'd left behind. My dearest Haruko, I am grateful you are alive. I heard the war ended, and I cried all day knowing you would come home eventually. Do not worry about us. Then the censored sections began. Black ink obscured whole paragraphs. But between the redactions, fragments of truth emerged. Tokyo has been everything after was blacked out. Our house is more black ink, but we are still alive. Food is another heavy mark covering the words, but we manage as best we can. Your brother Kenji, and here the worst section appeared. Nearly 3 full lines completely obliterated. Only the final words visible. He was only 15 years old. Haruko read that line 5 times. 6. Trying to will different words to appear. But the meaning was clear. Her baby brother was dead. While she ate 3 meals a day and slept on soft mattresses in an American prison camp, her 15-year-old brother had died. Probably from starvation. Probably trying to find food for their mother. She made no sound, just held the letter and let tears fall onto the paper, smudging the ink further. Emiko's letter came the next day. She recognized her mother's careful handwriting on the envelope. Her hands shook as she opened it. My daughter, your mother and sister Akiko remain in reasonable health. Our house was censored, but we are staying with your grandmother now in her small apartment. Akiko had to leave school to work. She is 16 but must labor at the next part was blacked out to earn money for food. Your father still teaches at the university, but censored again. He has grown very thin, but his spirit remains strong. He wants you to know this specifically. You have served our country honorably. Now your most important duty is to survive and come home to us. That is the mission that matters now. Do not blame yourself for surviving. The war is over. Survival is not disgrace, it is victory. Your mother misses you every day. She lights incense for you each evening. Come home safely. Tanaka Yuki. Emiko held the letter, her vision blurring. Her 16-year-old sister had quit school to work in some job deemed too shameful to write explicitly. Her father was starving. The family had lost their home. Everything they'd built over generations gone. While she ate beef stew and slept on clean sheets and gained healthy weight. That evening, the 300 women gathered in the yard sharing news from home. Every story was the same. Destroyed homes, dead relatives, starvation so severe people were eating grass bark, anything to fill their stomachs. Ayame received news that her brother had died at Okinawa in June, the same battle where Miller's friend Tommy had fallen. She spoke with a voice emptied of emotion, the grief too large to express. He fought to his last breath for our country, and I'm here living comfortably with the people who killed him. How do I reconcile that? How do I live with that? Sakura, always trying to find light in darkness, offered words meant to comfort. But the emperor told us to surrender. We obeyed his command. We're not cowards for surviving. An older woman shook her head bitterly. But eating well while our countrymen starve, sleeping warm while they freeze, being safe while they suffer. Isn't that still a kind of betrayal? Isn't our comfort built on their agony? Haruka whispered, barely audible. My mother wrote, do not blame yourself. But how can I not? My brother is dead and I'm alive. That's not fair. That's not right. The silence that followed was heavy with shared guilt. Survivor's guilt. The guilt of eating while others starved, of sleeping warm while others froze, of being safe while others suffered and died, of being treated with kindness by the enemy while their own people endured cruelty. Across the compound, Lieutenant Ishikawa watched through the fence. He saw the women growing healthier day by day. Skin regaining color, no longer the grayish pallor of malnutrition. Weight returning to gaunt frames. Hair becoming shiny and thick again, instead of brittle and falling out. Eyes brightening with health, and worse, with something that looked like hope. And it filled him with rage so pure it felt like righteousness. These women were forgetting. Forgetting their shame, forgetting their duty, forgetting that they should be suffering, not thriving. Every pound they gained was an insult to those dying in Japan. Every smile was a betrayal of those who'd given everything. He couldn't allow it to continue. One afternoon, as the women returned from their work assignments, Ishikawa gathered them in the yard. American guards stood at a distance but didn't interfere immediately. The Japanese officers had been granted limited rights to address their countrywomen as long as no physical contact occurred. Ishikawa's voice was ice wrapped in contempt. Look at yourselves. You grow fat on enemy food. You smile at American soldiers. You laugh at their jokes. You have forgotten who you are. He pointed at Sakura with a finger like an accusation. You. Yesterday I saw you accept candy from the American cook. Is that correct? Sakura's face went pale, but she answered honestly. Yes, Betty offered it and I accepted. Do you know what that means? You have sold the honor of our nation for the price of a piece of candy. You are no longer Japanese. You've become their pet, their dog, begging for treats and wagging your tail in gratitude. The words were designed to wound and they hit their target perfectly. Sakura's eyes filled with tears. Ishikawa addressed them all, now his voice rising. I warn you all, do not forget who you are. Your families are starving at home while you feast. Your countrymen lie beneath the earth while you sleep on soft beds. Your nation burns while you warm yourselves at the enemy's fire. Have you no shame left at all? 300 heads bowed under the weight of his words. Because part of them, a large part, believed he was right. How could they not? Everything in their upbringing said comfort during national suffering was shameful. That accepting kindness from enemies was weakness. That survival at any cost dishonored those who died. From beside a building, Miller watched with clenched fists. He couldn't understand the Japanese words, but body language spoke volumes. The officer was making them cry, using shame like a whip, creating wounds no one could see, but that bled just as surely. Miller called over David, the translator. What's he saying to them? David looked uncomfortable translating it. He's telling them they're betraying their country by accepting good treatment from us, sir. Using cultural concepts of honor and shame to make them feel guilty for eating and sleeping, for being alive and healthy. Miller's jaw tightened until his teeth ached. He's punishing them for accepting basic human decency, for not dying, yes, sir. In their culture, being captured is profound shame. He's weaponizing that shame, telling them that accepting our kindness makes them traitors. That comfort equals dishonor. Miller shook his head slowly, anger and sadness mixing in equal parts. That's the most twisted logic I've ever heard. He's torturing them without laying a finger on them. David nodded grimly. Yes, sir. And it works, better than physical torture would. Because they believe him. They've been taught these things their entire lives. He's not introducing new ideas. He's just reinforcing what they already fear is true. The Japanese officers had found the perfect weapon. Not violence, not physical torture, but the activation of shame so deep it was carved into their identities, making these women torture themselves with guilt, making survival itself feel like a crime. The American guards could protect them from external harm. They could feed them shelter, give them medicine. But how do you protect someone from the prison inside their own mind? How do you fight an enemy that lives in their thoughts and speaks with the voice of their own culture? Yet even as Ishikawa tightened his grip, small moments of transformation kept occurring. Like seeds planted in hard soil, invisible at first, but growing roots that would eventually crack stone. One evening after dinner, Betty noticed the women eating less, despite the food being plentiful. Their earlier hunger seemed to have disappeared, replaced by listless picking at their plates. She called Emiko over to the kitchen. "Honey, are the girls okay? They seem so sad lately, hardly eating. Did something happen?" Emiko hesitated. Explaining Japanese concepts of honor and shame to an American felt impossible. But Betty's eyes were so kind, so genuinely concerned that the words came out. Letters came from home. Many families are suffering terribly. People are starving. And the Japanese officers, they tell us we should be ashamed for eating well while our families suffer. That accepting your kindness is betraying our country. Betty's eyes filled with tears. She was quiet for a long moment, struggling with her own emotions. Then she spoke, and her voice carried the weight of personal loss. "Tell them something for me, Emiko. Will you translate this exactly?" Emiko nodded. Betty gathered herself. "Tell them that being kind to yourself is not shameful. Accepting food when you're hungry is not dishonor. It's survival. And survival takes more courage than death. I know that because I lost my son in this war." She pulled out a worn photograph from her apron pocket. A young man in an American uniform smiling at the camera. He died at Normandy Beach in France, fighting Germans. He was 20 years old. "I could hate every German I see for the rest of my life. I could hate every soldier from every enemy country." Betty's voice broke, but she continued. "You know what my boy would say if he were here? He'd say, 'Mom, the war's over. Feed the hungry, heal the wounded, help people rebuild their lives.' That's what we fought for. Not revenge, not endless hatred, but the chance to be decent human beings again." She looked directly at Emiko. "You girls didn't start this war. You didn't want it. You're victims too. Young women who got caught up in something so much bigger than you. Feeding you isn't charity. It's not even kindness. It's basic human decency. And don't you let anyone at all, make you feel ashamed for surviving, for being alive, for accepting help when you needed it." Emiko translated word for word, her voice shaking. Several women nearby started crying because they wanted so desperately to believe those words. But a lifetime of different teachings fought against acceptance. That night, the words spread through the barracks, whispered from bed to bed in the darkness. "Betty's son died fighting. She has every reason to hate us, but she feeds us instead. She calls us victims, not enemies. She says survival is courage, not shame. The seeds were planted, but seeds take time to grow." One afternoon while working in the clinic, Miller asked Emiko about her family. The question was casual, just making conversation during a slow period. But Emiko found herself telling him everything. About her father, the professor, her mother, the teacher, her sister Akiko, who'd had to quit school at 16 to work. Miller listened carefully. Then he pulled out his wallet and extracted a photograph. A blonde girl around 17 standing beside a brown horse, smiling broadly at the camera. "My sister Grace. She's 17 now, back on our ranch in Montana. I miss her every single day. I worry about her constantly. Is she eating well? Is she safe? Is she happy? Did she pass her exams? Is some boy treating her right?" He looked at the photo with such obvious love that Emiko felt her own throat tighten. "You remind me of her," Miller continued. "Same age roughly, same kind of determination in your eyes. That's part of why I wanted to make sure you and the other women are safe here. Protected, treated well." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Because somewhere in Montana, my sister is worrying about me, wondering if I'm safe, if I'm coming home. And somewhere in Tokyo, your sister is worrying about you the same way. Your mother is praying for you. Your father is hoping you're all right." Miller looked directly at Emiko. "We're all somebody's family, somebody's daughter, somebody's sister. When I look at you, I don't see the Japanese enemy. I see somebody's little sister who's far from home and scared. Just like my Grace would be if she were in your position." Those words hit Emiko like a revelation that rearranged her entire worldview in a single moment. We're all somebody's family. Miller didn't see her as the faceless Japanese enemy. He saw her as a specific human being, somebody's daughter from Tokyo, a young woman with a family that loved her and worried about her. Not a symbol of Japan, not a representation of the enemy, just a Miko, a person. For the first time, she questioned the very foundation of how she'd been taught to see the world. If the enemy sees me as human as somebody's beloved sister, why don't my own commanders? Why does the enemy care about my well-being more than the people who are supposed to protect me? The question had no good answer. But asking it changed everything. The camp offered English classes for prisoners who wanted to learn. Teacher Mary Peterson, 52 years old with gray hair and warm eyes, taught not just language but the ideas and values embedded in the words. In America, Mary explained one afternoon, we believe certain things are true. We believe all people are created equal. That means men and women, rich and poor, black and white. We believe in freedom. The freedom to speak your mind even if you disagree with the government. The freedom to choose your own path in life. The freedom to become whoever you want to be, limited only by your own abilities and efforts, not by what others decide for you. Haruka, whose English was improving rapidly, asked a question that had been burning in her mind. Even women. Women have these freedoms too. Mary smiled broadly, especially women. During the war, while men fought overseas, American women worked in factories building planes and tanks. We flew aircraft across the country delivering them to military bases. We ran businesses and farms and hospitals. We proved beyond any doubt that we can do anything men can do. And now that we've proven it, we're not going back to being told we can't. This information spread through the barracks that night like electricity through wire. Whispered conversations filled the darkness after lights out. Ayame spoke first, her voice thoughtful. Imagine choosing your own husband instead of accepting whoever your parents arrange. Actually falling in love first. Sakura added a note of wonder in her voice. Learning any profession you want. Becoming a doctor if you have the skill, not just a nurse because that's all women are allowed, Imako said quietly. And not being struck for making a mistake. Being taught instead. Being corrected gently instead of punished harshly. Having your questions answered instead of being told that questioning is disrespectful. Haruka was silent for a long time. Then she spoke the question none of them wanted to voice, but all were thinking. But we're still Japanese. This isn't our country. These are American ideas. Can they work in Japan? Should they? Miko thought carefully before answering. She'd been thinking about this very question for days. After the war, everything in Japan will have to change. Everything is destroyed. Cities, industries, government, everything. We'll have to rebuild from nothing. Maybe she paused. Maybe we don't have to rebuild it exactly the way it was. Maybe we can take some of these ideas home. Help build a new Japan. One where women have more freedom. Where people are valued for being human, not just for their obedience. The possibility hung in the air like the first star appearing at dusk. Faint but growing brighter as their eyes adjusted. That night, many women made silent decisions. They would not just survive their captivity, they would learn from it. They would study these foreign ideas about dignity, human rights, freedom of choice, the power of asking questions, the strength found in mercy rather than cruelty. And when they returned to their broken homeland, they would carry these lessons with them. Plant these seeds in Japanese soil. See what might grow. But they still weren't brave enough to challenge the officers openly. The invisible chains of cultural shame and ingrained obedience still held them. The fear of being rejected by their own people, of being called traitors, of bringing dishonor to their families. Not yet, but the day was coming. Seeds of change were being planted in soil that had never known such ideas. But seeds need time to germinate, to send down roots to gather strength before breaking through into sunlight. And these women were running out of time because the Japanese officers could feel their control slipping away like sand through desperate fingers. They could see the women changing, questioning, growing stronger and more independent with each passing day. And desperate men whose entire identity is built on power and control do desperate things when they feel that power slipping away. The confrontation that would shatter everything was just 2 weeks away. October brought cooler nights to the New Mexico desert. The temperature dropped from unbearable to merely uncomfortable. The women had been at Camp Lordsburg for 6 weeks now, 42 days of 3 meals daily, 42 days of medical care and clean beds. 42 days of small kindnesses that accumulated like drops of water, slowly filling an empty well. They were changing in ways both visible and invisible. Physically, they'd all gained healthy weight. Emiko had gone from 93 pounds to 108. Her ribs no longer showed through her skin. Her face had filled out. She looked alive again. But the deeper changes mattered more. The way they held themselves now, shoulders back instead of hunched in perpetual apology. Eyes that met American soldiers' gazes instead of staring at the ground in submission. Voices that asked questions instead of only answering them. Laughter that happened spontaneously, not just when permitted. They were learning what it felt like to be treated as human beings with value. And once you learn that, once you experience it deeply, you can never fully unlearn it. The knowledge changes something fundamental in how you see yourself and what you're willing to accept. Ishikawa saw it all, watched it happening with growing horror, because he understood exactly what was occurring. These women were learning that obedience wasn't the only way to live, that blind loyalty wasn't the highest virtue, that honor might mean something entirely different from what they had been taught, that questioning authority wasn't betrayal, but wisdom. He was losing control, and for a man whose entire identity was built on having power over others, losing that control felt like dying. In the officers' barracks one night, Ishikawa addressed his fellow commanders. They are forgetting who they are. Every day, they forget more. Soon they will stop being Japanese entirely. They will become American in spirit, even if Japanese in blood. Another officer nodded in agreement. We must act. Remind them severely of their duties and their shame. Ishikawa's eyes were cold and hard as winter stones. Tomorrow, I will make an example that none of them will forget. They will remember who they are and who has authority over them, or they will learn what happens when you abandon your duty to your nation. The next day dawned clear and cool. October 15th, a date that would be carved into 300 memories forever. The women returned from their work assignments around 4:30 in the afternoon. They walked in small groups talking quietly, tired from a day of labor, but in decent spirits. The work was hard but not unbearable, and the small pay gave them a sense of purpose, of contributing, of being valued for their efforts. Sakura walked near the back of the group, humming softly to herself. Not a Japanese song, an American one she'd learned from the radio in the kitchen while helping Betty. You Are My Sunshine, such a simple, cheerful song about how one person can brighten another's life. Betty had taught her the words, explaining that she used to sing it to her son when he was little. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. Ishikawa appeared from between the barracks like a predator that had been waiting for exactly the right moment to strike. He grabbed Sakura's arm, hard fingers digging into her flesh, yanked her out of the group. His voice was a growl of pure fury. You sing the enemy's songs. Have you completely forgotten you are Japanese? Have you no shame left at all? Sakura was too frightened to speak, too shocked by the sudden violence. She could only shake her head helplessly. Ishikawa turned to address all the women, his voice rising to carry across the yard. This is what happens when you forget honor. She sings American songs. She smiles at American soldiers. She has become their pet, their trained dog performing tricks for treats. He pulled out his bamboo stick from where he concealed it, the symbol of Japanese military authority, the tool of discipline, the physical representation of a power structure thousands of years old. You need to be reminded of your duty to your nation and your family. The stick rose high above his head, positioned to strike Sakura across the face. But before it could fall, something impossible happened. Something that had never occurred in the entire history of Imperial Japanese military culture. Sakura, still held by Ishikawa's grip on her arm, trembling, but with a voice that grew stronger with each word, said clearly, "No, I will not accept this." Ishikawa froze as if he'd been struck himself. What did you say? Sakura's voice grew louder, fueled by weeks of witnessing, kindness of learning. She had value as a human being, of understanding that authority doesn't automatically deserve obedience. No, I am not ashamed of singing. I am not ashamed of feeling joy. I am not ashamed of surviving. I did nothing wrong. I only sang a song that makes me happy. Absolute silence descended on the yard. 300 women stood frozen. Several American guards stopped what they were doing and started moving closer, sensing trouble. Never, never in their entire lives had any of them heard a Japanese woman, especially a young one, say no to a male officer. It violated every cultural norm, every rule of hierarchy, every understanding of how their world worked. Ishikawa's face turned crimson with rage. Veins stood out on his forehead. His hands shook on the bamboo stick. You dare refuse me. You dare speak back to your superior. Sakura was crying now, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't lower her head or take back her words. I did nothing wrong. Singing is not betrayal. Feeling happy is not shameful. Being alive is not a crime. Ishikawa raised the stick again, rage overtaking any restraint. You have betrayed everything we stand for. The stick swung down towards Sakura's head with the full force of Ishikawa's fury behind it. A large American hand shot out and caught the bamboo mid-swing, fingers like steel closing around it, stopping it completely. Sergeant Daniel Miller stood between Ishikawa and Sakura. 6'2" of quiet fury contained in absolute control. His voice was low but carried the weight of complete, unquestionable authority. I told you once before, you don't touch these women. That wasn't a suggestion. Ishikawa switched to English, his accent thick with rage. She is Japanese. I am her superior officer. This is military discipline. You have no right to interfere. Miller ripped the stick from Ishikawa's hand with a quick, violent motion. He snapped it in half like it was made of paper, not bamboo, threw both pieces on the ground between them. You're a prisoner of war. Same as her, same as every person in this camp. And in this camp in America, nobody hits anybody. Not officers hitting enlisted, not men hitting women, nobody. Do you understand me? 4 more American soldiers appeared forming a loose circle, their hands resting on holstered sidearms, not drawn yet, but the message was unmistakably clear. This ends now. Ishikawa looked around and reality crashed down on him. He was surrounded, outnumbered, outgunned. His authority was nothing here. His rank meant nothing. His cultural power had no weight in this foreign land. But more devastating than the American soldiers was what he saw when he looked at the faces of the 300 Japanese women. For the first time, he saw something in their eyes that filled him with a dread deeper than any battle could create. Not fear, not submission, not the bowed heads and lowered eyes of those who accept their place in the hierarchy, but defiance, quiet, steady, unshakable defiance. He had already lost. The control he'd wielded through shame and cultural obligation was breaking apart. One act of courage at a time, one woman finding her voice at a time, one moment of kindness from the enemy at a time, and he could not stop it. The world was changing, and he was being left behind, still clinging to old ways that no longer held power. Captain Richards arrived, having been immediately notified of the situation. He addressed Ishikawa with a voice hard as iron and cold as mountain snow. Lieutenant Ishikawa, effective immediately, you and the other Japanese officers will be moved to a separate compound. You will have absolutely no further contact with these women without direct American supervision present. If you attempt to enforce any form of discipline, punishment, or intimidation on them again, you will be placed in solitary confinement indefinitely. Is that completely clear? Ishikawa's jaw clenched so hard his teeth should have cracked. This violates Geneva Convention. They are my countrymen. I have right to speak to them. Richard stepped closer, towering despite being shorter than Ishikawa. You have the right to speak. You do not have the right to threaten. You do not have the right to intimidate. You do not have the right to use shame as a weapon. The line is drawn here, Lieutenant. If you cross it again, there will be serious consequences. Then Emiko did something that surprised even herself. Something that went against every fiber of her upbringing, every lesson about women's place, every rule about respecting male authority, every understanding of how Japanese society functioned. She stepped forward from the crowd of women, looked Ishikawa directly in the eyes without lowering her gaze, and spoke in Japanese loud enough for everyone to hear. We are survivors, not traitors. Ishikawa glared at her with hatred so pure it was almost tangible. But Emiko continued, her voice shaking but growing stronger with each word. We served our country faithfully. We obeyed the emperor when he commanded us to surrender. We did our duty. Now we survive. Not because we are cowards, but because we are brave. Because living with dignity takes more courage than dying in shame. She paused, gathering herself for the final truth. And we just learned something important. True honor is not dying on command like obedient dogs. True honor is living with dignity, treating other people as human beings deserving of respect, choosing kindness over cruelty, choosing mercy over revenge, choosing to question instead of blindly obeying. Her voice rang clear across the silent yard. The enemy taught us that. American soldiers who had every reason to hate us taught us what honor really means. And you, our countryman, our commanding officer, taught us the opposite. You taught us that shame is a weapon, that fear is control, that obedience without thought is virtue. Emiko looked around at the 300 women watching. We know now which lesson is true. This statement from a 24-year-old woman shattered hierarchies that had stood for millennia, challenged assumptions that had governed Japanese society for generations, spoke truths that had been hidden beneath layers of cultural obligation and forced silence. Ishikawa looked at Emiko with loathing so absolute it seemed to radiate from him in waves. His voice shook with fury. You are dead to honor. You are no longer Japanese. You are nothing. Emiko met his gaze without flinching, without bowing, without showing any of the deference he'd always commanded through fear. No, Lieutenant, I finally learned what honor really means, and it has nothing to do with dying for a lie. Then it happened. One woman started crying, then another, then 5, then 20, then all 300. But these weren't tears of fear, weren't tears of shame, weren't tears of guilt. These were tears of liberation. They had just been freed from the most invisible, most powerful prison of all, the prison of shame that had been built in their minds since childhood, the prison of fear that controlled them more effectively than any barbed wire, the prison of false honor that said dying was noble but surviving was disgrace. Sakura collapsed to her knees, sobbing into her hands, all the terror and relief pouring out at once. Haruko embraced Emiko, both of them shaking with emotion. Even Ayami, who had maintained iron control through years of widowhood and war, wept openly for the first time since her husband's death. And Miller stood watching with his own eyes wet, because he understood what he was witnessing. Not a military victory, not the defeat of armed enemies, but something rarer and more profound. The victory of human dignity over the systems designed to crush it, the triumph of mercy over cycles of revenge, the courage of women finding their voices in a world that had always demanded their silence. A real victory, the kind that actually changes lives forever, the kind that ripples through generations, the kind that transforms how people understand themselves and each other, the kind that Tommy would have been proud of, the kind that justified every sacrifice made in this terrible war. The proof that even in the darkest times, human beings could choose kindness over cruelty, could choose to see each other's humanity instead of just national identity, could choose mercy, and in that choice find something worth more than any military conquest. Find redemption, find hope, find the possibility that maybe, just maybe, the world could be better than it had been. Within 2 hours of the confrontation, Lieutenant Ishikawa and the 5 other Japanese officers were relocated to a separate compound 200 meters from the women's barracks. Barbed wire fences created a clear boundary between them. Guard towers maintained constant surveillance. The officers could still see the women's barracks in the distance, could still watch the daily routines, but they could no longer reach them, could no longer control them, could no longer wield shame like a sword. The physical distance was small. The psychological distance was infinite. The 300 women stood at the fence of their compound, watching as the officers were marched away with their few belongings. American soldiers escorted them, professional and firm, but not cruel. Just men doing a job. Not a single woman bowed as the officers passed. Not a single head lowered in automatic deference. Not a single heart felt the old familiar fear. Some women stood straight with hands at their sides, simply watching. Others held hands with the women beside them, taking strength from each other. A few, including Emiko, met Ishikawa's eyes directly as he walked past, refusing to be the first to look away. It was a small act, but small acts of courage accumulate into revolutions. For the first time in their lives, they stood free. Not physically, they were still prisoners of war, but free in the way that mattered most. Free from the invisible chains of shame and cultural obligation that had bound them more tightly than any physical restraints ever could. That evening in the mess hall, something remarkable happened. Betty had prepared what she called a celebration dinner, though she was too tactful to use that exact word given the circumstances. Fried chicken, golden and crispy, the smell filling the entire building like an embrace. Mashed potatoes whipped smooth with butter and cream until they were clouds on a plate. Corn on the cob, sweet kernels bursting with flavor, butter melting and running down to their elbows. Apple pie still warm from the oven, cinnamon and sugar creating an aroma that spoke of safety and home and better days ahead. Sakura still shaky from the afternoon's events, but surrounded by supportive friends took the first bite of fried chicken. The crispy coating crunched between her teeth with a satisfying sound. The meat inside was tender and juicy, perfectly seasoned. She closed her eyes, really tasting it for the first time without the weight of guilt crushing every sensation. Then she laughed, out loud, clear and bright as a bell, word joy at something simple and good. The sound was so unexpected, so free, that several women looked up startled. Then they began to smile, then laugh themselves. Not at anything particularly funny, just the release of tension that had been building for weeks, months, years. The sound of women who had been silent so long, finally finding their voices. Haruko looked around the table at the plates piled high with food, at the faces no longer pinched with fear and guilt. She picked up her fork deliberately. I'm going to eat every bite of this meal, every single bite, and I will feel no shame at all, because being alive is not a crime. Surviving is not betrayal. Ayame, the widow who had carried grief like stones in her pockets for 3 years, spoke quietly but clearly. My husband Kenji died at Guadalcanal fighting American soldiers. But I think, she paused, I truly think he would want me to live. Not die in shame because I survived when he didn't, but live with dignity, live fully, live in a way that honors his sacrifice by building something good from all this destruction. She looked around at the younger women. He would want me to help you, to teach you, to make sure some good comes from all this suffering. That's the real way to honor the dead. Not by dying ourselves, but by living well and helping others. Amiko felt something shift inside her chest, a weight she'd been carrying since the Emperor's surrender announcement finally lifting. She realized with sudden clarity that this was the real victory. Not defeating an enemy army, not winning territory or resources, but defeating the voice inside your own head that says you don't deserve kindness. That survival is disgrace. That accepting help makes you weak. This was freedom. And it tasted like apple pie with cinnamon. It felt like sunshine after years of rain. It sounded like laughter among friends. November came to the New Mexico desert with cooler temperatures and crystalline clear skies. Without the constant pressure of shame from the officers, the women began to truly transform. Not just surviving anymore, not just enduring, but growing, learning, building. Preparing for futures they could now imagine without the heavy curtain of guilt obscuring everything. Amiko threw herself into studying modern medical techniques with an intensity that impressed even Sarah. She read medical textbooks in English, slowly at first looking up every third word in the dictionary Miller had given her. But her speed increased week by week as her vocabulary expanded. She took meticulous notes in her leather-bound journal, filling page after page with knowledge she would carry home like precious cargo. She studied patient dignity, informed consent, pain management not as weakness, but as compassion. She learned about treating illness while honoring the humanity of the person suffering. She absorbed the philosophy that a patient's body belonged to them, not to doctors or military commanders or anyone else. She also studied human rights, a concept that seemed almost impossible at first. Rights that belonged to you simply because you were human, not granted by emperor or government or commanding officer, not something that could be taken away based on your nation's military fortunes, but inherent, inalienable, universal. Every evening she wrote in her journal by lamplight, documenting everything, every lesson learned, every kindness received, every moment that challenged what she'd been taught, every realization that changed how she saw the world. Some days she thought as her pen moved across the page, this story needs to be told, not just for history, but so others can learn what we learned. That enemies can teach you mercy, that kindness is strength, that questioning authority is wisdom, not betrayal. Haruko discovered talents she never knew she possessed. Organization, numbers, systems thinking. She learned to use a typewriter, the keys clacking under her fingers like a new language being spoken into existence. She studied basic accounting and business principles, understanding for the first time how money moved, how businesses operated, how systems could be built to create value rather than just extract it through force. For the first time in her life, she imagined herself not as someone's employee, not as someone's subordinate, but as someone who could create, build, lead, own something of her own, make decisions that mattered. The idea was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. Sakura learned American cooking from Betty, but the lessons went far deeper than recipes. Betty taught her that food was love made tangible, that feeding people was an act of care and dignity, not just biological necessity, that a meal could heal emotional wounds as surely as medicine healed physical ones. I want to open a restaurant when I go home, Sakura told Betty one afternoon while they kneaded bread dough together. American food and Japanese food together, showing people that enemies can share meals. That food brings people together instead of dividing them. Betty stopped kneading flour, dusting her hands and apron. She looked at Sakura with tears in her eyes. Then she pulled the young woman into a tight hug, getting flour on both of them. That's the most beautiful idea I've ever heard, honey. That's how we heal from war. Not by staying separate and nursing our hatred, but by breaking bread together, by feeding each other, by remembering that we're all just hungry humans who need nourishment and care. She pulled back, holding Sakura's shoulders. You promise me you'll do that. You promise me you'll open that restaurant and invite everyone, Japanese and American, former enemies sitting together and eating together and realizing they're not so different after all. Sakura promised, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. Ayami studied nursing techniques that prioritize patient comfort and psychological healing alongside physical treatment. She took careful notes on everything, already envisioning the nursing school she would open in Japan. A school where nurses would be trained not just in medical skills, but in human compassion, where patients would be treated as people with fears and hopes and dignity, not just as problems to be efficiently solved. She gathered the younger nurses around her some evenings in the barracks, informal classes where she shared what she was learning and challenged them to think differently about their profession. We will take this knowledge home, she told them one night, her voice carrying quiet passion. We will teach Japanese nurses that healing includes kindness, that strength includes gentleness, that honor includes compassion for the suffering. We will change how our country treats the sick and injured, one nurse at a time, one patient at a time, one moment of dignity at a time. The young nurses listened with shining eyes, hungry for this vision of a different future. In early November, Emiko wrote a letter home. She spent 3 evenings crafting it carefully, knowing censors would read every word, but hoping her meaning would still come through. Dearest Mother and Akiko, I am learning things I never imagined existed. I am learning that true honor is not dying on command like obedient soldiers, but living with dignity like free human beings. I am learning that women can be strong without being cruel, that asking questions is wisdom, not disrespect, that different ideas can exist together without violence destroying everything. When I come home, and I will come home, I want to share these lessons with you, Akiko, and with all young Japanese women who will rebuild our country. I want to help build a new Japan, a place where women are respected for their minds and abilities, not just valued for their obedience, where questions are welcomed as paths to better understanding, not punished as threats to authority, where different ideas can coexist and strengthen each other instead of demanding uniformity. Mother, I am not ashamed of surviving this war. I am proud. Proud that I learned these lessons. Proud that I can bring this knowledge home to help heal our broken nation. Proud that I lived when death seemed easier, because living with dignity takes more courage than dying in shame. Tell Father his teachings about the value of education and questioning were right all along. He gave me tools that saved my life and will help me build something good from all this destruction. I love you both. I will see you soon. Your daughter, Emiko. She sealed the letter hoping it would pass the censors, hoping her mother would understand the transformation happening inside her daughter's heart, hoping that when she finally came home, her family would see the change not as betrayal but as growth. One December afternoon, while organizing medical supplies in the clinic, Emiko asked Miller the question that had haunted her for months. They were alone in the storage room, and the question came out before she could second-guess herself. Sergeant Miller, it made to understand something. You lost your best friend to Japanese soldiers. You held him while he died. You had every right, every reason to hate all of us, to want revenge, to make us suffer. She paused, struggling with the words. But you protected us instead. You defended us from our own officers. You showed us kindness when you could have shown cruelty. Why I need to understand why. Miller was quiet for a long time. He continued organizing bandages, his large hands moving with surprising gentleness. Finally, he spoke. My best friend Tommy Rodriguez died at Okinawa in April. Japanese artillery shell hit our position. I held him while he bled out on that volcanic sand. I was covered in his blood. I made him a promise as he died that I would make the Japanese pay for what they did. He stopped swallowing hard, the grief still fresh after all these months. Emiko lowered her head, expecting the anger to come now. The revelation that the kindness had been temporary, that the real feelings were hatred after all. But Miller continued, and his voice was thick with emotion but not anger. For months after, I hated every Japanese person. Wanted all of you to suffer like Tommy suffered. Wanted revenge so badly it ate me from the inside. I dreamed about making Japanese soldiers pay. He turned to face Emiko directly now. Then I came here, and I saw you, saw all of you. Not soldiers, not the enemy I'd been fighting. Just women. Young women who were scared and hungry and far from home, who'd been caught up in something bigger than any individual, who'd lost people they loved too, who were suffering their own griefs. Miller's voice dropped to almost a whisper, and I realized something that changed everything. Tommy wouldn't want me to hate. He was the kindest person I ever knew. Used to share his rations with local kids wherever we were stationed. Used to say that most people everywhere just want to live in peace and take care of their families, that it's governments and militaries that make enemies out of ordinary people. He used to say, war makes us enemies, Danny, but we don't have to stay enemies forever. When the fighting stops, we get to choose. Revenge or mercy, hatred or healing. We get to choose what kind of men we become. Miller looked directly into Emiko's eyes. So when I protect you, when I show you kindness, I'm not betraying Tommy. I'm honoring him. I'm proving that his death wasn't meaningless, that his belief in human goodness wasn't naive, that kindness can survive even after so much killing and dying. He paused, gathering himself. I'm proving that mercy is stronger than revenge, that we can be better than the worst things we've experienced, that the cycle of hatred can be broken by people who deliberately choose to be kind even when they have every reason not to be. A tear ran down Emiko's cheek. She had never heard honor defined so beautifully, had never understood that strength could mean choosing gentleness, that courage could mean refusing revenge when revenge would be so easy. Miller reached into his bag and pulled out a small English to Japanese dictionary. Well worn but carefully maintained, he handed it to Emiko with both hands like it was something precious. For your future, keep learning, keep growing. And when you get home, teach other Japanese women what you learned here, not just English words, but dignity, freedom, the courage to question, the strength to be kind, the understanding that your value as a human being doesn't depend on your nation or your gender or your rank. It's inherent. It's permanent. No one can take it away unless you let them. Emiko took the book like it was made of gold and wrapped in prayers. I will never forget you, Sergeant Miller. Never. And I will teach Japanese girls that the enemy taught me about true honor and real kindness. That an American soldier who had every reason to hate showed me what mercy really means. Miller smiled, sad but genuine. Maybe someday we won't be enemies anymore. Maybe someday we'll just be people who remember that underneath all the flags and uniforms, we're all somebody's family, somebody's son or daughter, somebody's beloved child. And that recognition, that's the beginning of all peace. January 15th, 1946. The morning dawned cold and clear. The sky that particular shade of blue that only happens in the desert when the air is perfectly clean and dry. The day of departure had finally arrived. 300 women packed their few belongings into small bags. The clothes they'd been given, now worn from months of use, but still better than what they'd arrived in. Letters from home precious despite the heartbreak they contain. Small gifts from American soldiers and staff. Books, Notebooks filled with lessons and recipes and dreams written in a mixture of Japanese and broken English. Photographs. Betty had taken pictures of groups of women, giving each a copy to take home. They lined up in the yard one final time to board the trucks that would take them to California, then to ships bound for Japan, their true home, the place they'd been desperate to return to for months. But now that departure was here, the emotions were more complicated than simple joy. They were leaving behind something important, not just a place, but an experience that had transformed them fundamentally. They were not the same women who had arrived 5 months ago. The transformation was visible in every aspect of their being. Physically, they had gained healthy weight. Most had added between 8 and 12 kilograms. Emiko had gone from 93 pounds to 110. Their skin glowed with health instead of showing the grayish pallor of malnutrition. Hair that had been brittle and falling out was now thick and shiny. Eyes were bright and clear instead of dull with hunger and despair. But the physical changes, dramatic as they were, paled compared to the deeper transformation. They stood differently now, shoulders back, spine straight, not the rigid posture of military discipline, but the natural alignment of people who had nothing to apologize for. They made eye contact with American soldiers instead of keeping their gazes fixed on the ground in automatic submission. Some smiled and waved. A few even hugged soldiers they'd worked with closely. They spoke with confidence now, asked questions freely, expressed opinions without waiting for permission. Small acts that would have been unthinkable 5 months ago. They carried knowledge, basic conversational English, professional skills in nursing, cooking, office administration. But more importantly, they carried new ideas about human dignity, women's rights, the power of questioning authority, the strength found in mercy rather than revenge, the courage it takes to be kind in a cruel world. They were going home to a destroyed nation, but they were taking with them the seeds of something new, something that might help rebuild Japan into something different, something better. The American staff gathered to say goodbye. It was a more emotional farewell than anyone had expected. Betty came with cloth bags for each woman sewn by her own hands over the past 2 weeks. Inside each bag, cookies she'd baked the night before, staying up until 3 in the morning to make sure every woman got some. Chocolate bars purchased with her own money. Bars of good soap. Small luxuries for families who had nothing. For your families, Betty said through tears as she handed out the bags. Tell them that an American woman who lost her son in this war cares about Japanese women and their families. Tell them that mothers are mothers everywhere in the world, that we all love our children the same thing, that we all want peace and safety and enough food to feed our babies. She hugged each woman individually, 300 embraces. By the end, her eyes were swollen from crying and her arms ached, but she didn't stop until she'd said goodbye to every single one. These girls had become like daughters to her, living, breathing proof that even in the midst of total war, human connections could form across enemy lines. That kindness was possible even when everything seemed to demand cruelty. That healing could begin even before the fighting fully stopped. Sarah, the red-haired nurse who had been the first to welcome them, held Emiko's hands in both of hers. Her green eyes were wet with tears. "You are the strongest woman I have ever known. Don't let anyone at all tell you otherwise. You survived a war. You survived shame and fear and cultural pressure that would have broken most people. You learned to stand up for yourself and for others. That takes more courage than any battlefield bravery." She pressed a small book into Emiko's hands. Florence Nightingale's writings on nursing and healthcare reform. Well used with notes in the margins in Sarah's handwriting. Study this. Use it. Change how Japan treats patients and nurses. You have the power to heal your country in ways soldiers and politicians never could. Not with weapons or laws, but with mercy and dignity and care for suffering people. Emiko clutched the book to her chest, unable to speak through her tears. Captain Richards addressed them formally, standing at attention, as he would for any important military occasion. "Ladies, you came here as prisoners of war, defeated and fearful. You leave as women who understand that human dignity transcends national boundaries, that mercy is strength, that kindness is courage. Take that knowledge home. Rebuild Japan with it. Show your country that true strength includes the power to be gentle, that real honor includes treating all people with respect, even former enemies." He paused, his usually stern face softening. You have taught us as much as we taught you. You showed us that the enemy has faces, families' fears, and hopes just like ours. You reminded us why we fought this war, not for conquest or revenge, but to defend the idea that all people deserve dignity and freedom. Thank you for that gift. Then Miller approached Emiko. They had already exchanged the dictionary days ago, but he had one more thing to say. One final lesson to impart. Remember what we talked about. Kindness is strength, not weakness. Teaching that to the next generation, making sure they understand it deeply, that's your mission now. Not just your job or your hobby, your purpose, your way of making sure all this suffering meant something. Emiko bowed deeply, the Japanese way, showing the respect she felt. But when she rose, she did something that would have been unthinkable 5 months ago. She extended her hand for an American-style handshake. Miller grasped her hand firmly. Not superior to inferior, not victor to defeated, but equal to equal. Two human beings who had taught each other about mercy and courage. Two former enemies who had discovered their shared humanity. The women climbed into the trucks, moving slowly, reluctant, now that the moment was actually here. As the engines started rumbling to life, Emiko leaned out the window. Her voice rang clear across the compound, speaking in careful, practiced English. Thank you. We will never forget. We will teach Japan what you taught us. We will build a better world. 300 voices joined hers in a chorus. Thank you. Thank you, some in English, some in Japanese, all carrying the same meaning. Gratitude, recognition, a promise to carry these lessons forward. The American soldiers waved back, many of them, wiping away tears openly. They had expected to guard prisoners and count down days until they could go home themselves. Instead, they had witnessed transformation, had participated in something that felt more important than any battle. The victory of human dignity over the systems designed to crush it. The triumph of mercy over cycles of revenge. The trucks pulled away slowly, dust rising in their wake. The women watched Camp Lordsburg disappear behind them. That desert prison surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers. That place they had feared and dreaded. That place that had become, against all odds and expectations, the birthplace of their freedom. Tokyo, Japan, 1985, 40 years later. An elderly woman sits in a comfortable living room in a modern apartment building. Outside the window, Tokyo thrives and pulses with energy. Skyscrapers pierce the sky, their glass and steel surfaces reflecting clouds and sunlight. Bullet trains race by on elevated tracks, moving so fast they're just blurs of white and blue. Electronic billboards the size of buildings flash advertisements for products that didn't exist when she was young. Cars fill streets that had been rubble and ash 40 years ago. The city that had been burned to nothing, that had risen from atomic ashes and conventional bombing devastation, now gleams with prosperity and peace. A testament to human resilience and the power of rebuilding with new ideas instead of just reconstructing old patterns. Emiko Tanaka is 64 years old now. Her hair is silver, pulled back in a neat bun that shows the elegant lines of her face. Reading glasses perch on her nose, attached to a delicate chain. She wears a simple but well-made dress, modern in style but with traditional elements. Around her sit 4 granddaughters ranging in age from 10 to 16, all listening with the rapt attention of young people, hearing a story that challenges everything they thought they knew. Grandmother, the oldest granddaughter, Yuki, says 16 years old and intellectually curious in the way Emiko herself had been at that age. Tell us about the war. You never talk about it directly, but we read about it in school and I want to know what it was really like, what you really experienced. Emiko smiles a smile that carries sadness and joy in equal measure. She reaches into a drawer in the side table and pulls out an old, worn English and Japanese dictionary, the one Miller gave her 40 years ago. Its cover is faded almost beyond recognition, pages yellowed and soft from decades of use, spine cracked from being opened 10,000 times, but still intact, still treasured above almost anything else she owns. There was a time, she begins, her voice carrying the weight of lived experience, when I thought the enemy were demons without mercy and my own people were my protectors. I was taught that Americans were evil, that capture was the ultimate shame, that obedience to authority was the highest virtue. She pauses, looking at each granddaughter in turn. But I learned the opposite was true. And that learning changed my life and perhaps in some small way helped change Japan itself. She tells them the story, all of it. Camp Lordsburg in the New Mexico desert, where the temperature reached over 100 degrees. The kindness that felt like a trap at first because it contradicted everything she'd been taught. Lieutenant Ishikawa and his weapon of shame, more effective than any gun. The American soldiers who asked permission before touching you, who said please and thank you, who treated prisoners like human beings with inherent value. She tells them about Betty's fried chicken and apple pie, about food as love and care, about Sarah's gentle medical treatment and the revelation that patients deserve respect, about Miller and his belief that honoring his dead friend meant showing mercy, not seeking revenge. She tells them about the day Sakura said no, about her own moment of speaking truth to power, about 300 women crying tears of liberation when they realized they didn't have to accept shame as their identity. The granddaughters listen transfixed. This is not the war story they expected. No heroic battles, no noble sacrifices, no clear heroes and villains. Just complicated human beings trying to survive with dignity, learning that everything they'd been taught about honor might be wrong, discovering that enemies could teach them more about humanity than their own leaders. The youngest granddaughter, only 10 years old but already thoughtful beyond her years, asks the question that matters most. But grandmother, weren't you supposed to be ashamed? You were a prisoner. Everyone says being captured is disgrace. Imiko shakes her head gently, reaching out to touch the child's cheek with a wrinkled but still graceful hand. No, my dear, I learned something crucial in that desert prison. Surviving with dignity is not disgrace, it is victory. Accepting kindness when you need it is not weakness, it is wisdom. Questioning what you have been taught is not betrayal. It is the beginning of all real understanding. She looks at each granddaughter, making sure they truly hear her words. I learned that true honor has nothing to do with dying on command, like an obedient dog. True honor is treating other people as human beings deserving of respect and compassion, especially when those people are your supposed enemies. The 16-year-old Yuki leans forward with intense curiosity. What did you do after you came home? How did you use what you learned? Emiko's eyes light up with remembered passion and purpose. Oh, so much. So very much. I became a nurse using the techniques Sarah taught me, treating patients with dignity, explaining procedures before performing them, asking permission, managing pain as a priority, not an afterthought. These were revolutionary ideas in 1946 Japan. Many doctors thought I was being too soft, but patients responded. They healed better when treated with respect. Slowly, other nurses started adopting these methods. I taught English to young women, hundreds of them, over the years. But I didn't just teach vocabulary and grammar. I taught the ideas embedded in the language. Freedom as a positive value. Rights that belong to you inherently. The power of questioning and critical thinking. The concept that authority should be earned and justified, not blindly obeyed. I wrote a memoir in 1975. She gestures to a bookshelf where several copies of her book sit alongside translations into other languages. Called it When the Enemy Showed Mercy. It became required reading in many schools and universities. Helped an entire generation understand that wars are fought by human beings, not monsters. That yesterday's enemies can become today's friends if we choose mercy over endless revenge. I founded an organization to help women affected by the war. Gave them skills, education, psychological support. Helped them rebuild lives with dignity instead of shame. Helped them understand that surviving didn't make them weak or disgraceful, it made them resilient. She pauses, remembering friends and colleagues. Your grandmother, Haruko, she runs a successful accounting firm now. One of the first in Japan, owned and operated by a woman, employs mostly women, trains them in business skills, creates opportunities that didn't exist before. Sakura opened the first American-Japanese fusion restaurant in Osaka in 1952. People thought she was crazy. Japanese food and American food together. But it became incredibly popular. Now she has 3 locations and has trained dozens of young chefs in her philosophy that food brings people together across all boundaries. Ayame opened a nursing school that revolutionized patient care in Japan. She trained thousands of nurses over 30 years, all of them learning that healing requires both medical skill and human compassion. Many of her students went on to open their own schools, spreading the ideas further. Emiko looks around at her granddaughters with pride. We all kept our promise. We took what we learned in that American prison camp and used it to help rebuild Japan. Not just the physical buildings and infrastructure, but the ideas, the philosophy of how human beings should treat each other. The room is silent as the girls absorb this. Then Yuki asks one more question, her voice soft. Did you ever see Sergeant Miller again? Amiko's face shows deep emotion. She opens the drawer again and carefully removes a yellowed envelope handled so many times the edges are soft. Inside a letter dated 1975, written in slightly shaky handwriting. After my book was published and translated into English, I received this. She reads aloud, translating from English to Japanese as she goes. Dear Emiko, I read your book. I'm immensely proud of you. You kept your promise to teach the next generation about kindness and dignity and the courage it takes to choose mercy over revenge. That's exactly what Tommy would have wanted, exactly what we fought for. Thank you for reminding me and anyone who reads your words that wars can end, but the kindness we show each other can last forever. That enemies can become teachers. That the greatest victory is not defeating others, but discovering our shared humanity. Your friend across the ocean, Daniel Miller. Tears run down Amiko's weathered cheeks as she reads just as they did 40 years ago when she first received the letter. The granddaughters are crying too, moved by the depth of connection between their grandmother and this American soldier who showed her mercy when he had every reason for revenge. Amiko carefully returns the letter to its envelope, to its place of honor in her drawer. She looks at her granddaughters, these young women who have grown up in peace and prosperity, who have never known the fear and deprivation of war. Remember this, my dears. This is what I want you to carry forward. Honor is not blind obedience to authority. Honor is treating others with dignity and respect, even and especially your enemies. The American soldiers taught me that. They showed me that kindness is the strongest force in the world. Stronger than hatred, stronger than revenge, strong enough to transform enemies into friends and shame into pride. She gestures out the window at modern Tokyo, at the city that rose from ashes. Japan was rebuilt after the war, not just with concrete and steel and technology, but with new ideas about human rights, democracy, women's equality, the value of individual dignity. These ideas came from many sources, from the American occupation, from Japanese reformers, from international influences. But she allows herself a small, proud smile. A tiny piece of that change, a small but real contribution, came from 300 women who spent 5 months in a New Mexico desert prison camp, who learned from their enemies what honor truly means, who brought those lessons home and planted them like seeds in Japanese soil. And those seeds grew. Slowly, one nurse treating a patient with dignity, one teacher encouraging a girl to question and think, one woman starting a business and proving women could lead, one restaurant showing that former enemies could share meals and discover they weren't so different after all. The youngest granddaughter asked one final question. Are you proud, grandmother, proud that you survived when you were told you should be ashamed? Amiko's answer comes without hesitation, clear and certain. Yes, my dear, I am proud, so very proud, because surviving gave me the chance to learn these lessons about mercy and dignity. And teaching those lessons to all of you, to your parents' generation, to thousands of students and readers, and anyone who would listen, that's worth more than any military victory could ever be. She looks around at 4 generations of women sitting together. The oldest carrying memories of war and transformation. The youngest carrying hopes for a future built on the lessons learned in that desert prison so long ago. This is why I survived, not by accident, not through shame, but to be here now telling you this story, making sure you understand that the cycle of hatred can be broken, that enemies can become friends, that mercy is strength, that kindness matters more than conquest, that how we treat each other, especially those we could easily mistreat with justification, that defines who we really are. The sun sets over Tokyo, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. In this apartment across this city that rebuilt itself from total destruction, the story is being passed down. From grandmother who lived it to granddaughters who will carry it forward. This is the untold story of 300 Japanese women who learned that true honor has nothing to do with which flag you salute or which uniform you wear. It has everything to do with how you treat other human beings. All human beings, even especially those you've been taught are your enemies. War creates divisions. But what we do after the guns fall silent, that's what defines us. Do we choose revenge that perpetuates cycles of violence forever? Or do we choose mercy that breaks those cycles and creates possibilities for something better? These 300 women chose mercy, chose understanding, chose to learn from their supposed enemies and carry those lessons home. In doing so, they participated in one of history's quiet miracles, the transformation of enemies into teachers, of captors into liberators from shame, of defeat into the foundation for something new and better. May we all remember their story. May we all remember that we are, every one of us, somebody's beloved family member, somebody's daughter or son, somebody's sister or brother. And that recognition, that simple acknowledgement of our shared humanity beneath all the artificial divisions of nationality and ideology, that's the beginning of all peace, all mercy, all hope for a world that can be better than it has been. This has been their story, a true story from World War II. A story that deserves to be remembered and told and passed down through generations, not just as history, but as instruction, as proof that even in the darkest times, human kindness can survive and flourish and change the world in ways that armies never could. The 300 women of Camp Lordsburg proved something precious and rare. That true victory is not defeating your enemy. True victory is learning from your enemy, discovering your shared humanity, choosing mercy when revenge would be easier, and carrying those lessons forward to build something better from the ruins of war. They survived with dignity. They learned with open hearts. They taught with courage. They changed lives and helped transform their nation. And they proved that mercy, real mercy freely chosen, is the foundation of all lasting peace and all genuine human progress. May their story echo through time. May it remind us always that kindness is strength, that mercy is courage, that we are all, beneath everything that seems to divide us, simply human beings trying to survive and protect those we love. And in that recognition lies the seed of all peace, all healing, all hope for tomorrow.